Okay, sounds good.
All right, we're recording. All right. So the
Let's do
first
it.
one's about glaciers, rivers, and Paul Bunyan. Oh, wait, no. But this one we just explain what we're doing.
Hold on, I need to get my pillow out of the way. Otherwise, people know that I sleep in this room. It's okay.
Logan, you're a little blurrier than usual. What's going on here?
Am I? Is this a bit? Is this beginning an episode?
Yeah, this is my improv thing where we explain that we're not filming this like a normal episode because it's through Zoom, and this isn't a normal episode. It's actually something we did because my mother's an elementary school teacher and they were talking about local history, so we recorded bits for them of us explaining some things. But since we're in quarantine, we couldn't visit them in person, so we did it via Zoom. We recorded ourselves talking and then we sent it to the kids. That's what that was.
Oh, okay. Okay.
We're recording.
Hi, kids.
Welcome to your guest lecturer, guest teachers. You guys might know me. I am Sam Temple. I am Mrs. Temple's son. This is my friend Logan. Logan, why don't you introduce yourself?
I'm Logan. I'm a friend of Sam, who is Mrs. Temple's son.
Yes. And Logan and I work together to tell local history stories, and we do this in the form of documentaries. I don't know if Mrs. Temple has shown you some of them, but we've mostly focused in Faribault. Mrs. Temple's probably mentioned that she lives there, but we've also talked about Northfield. Logan
lives in Northfield.
Logan lives in Northfield, kind of.
Yeah.
In that he doesn't actually, he used to live in Northfield when we started, and now he lives in Dundas.
Dundas is basically Northfield. But that is not a history fact. So
I am excited for Mrs. Temple to deal with the kids in her class who live in Dundas and are upset that it has been demolished in the mind of Logan Ledman.
I'm a Dundas guy too, so it's fine. But
yeah.
You were saying.
Yeah, so Logan, I was wondering, of the stories that we've told in our documentaries, what has been your favorite?
Ooh, that's a great question. Definitely one of my favorites has actually been the story of Northfield's founder, John North, which we'll get to a little bit today. So you kids, you're going to want to make sure you stick around to hear John North's story because it's pretty good.
Yeah. John North founded Northfield, as we will come to in the year 1855, and that was actually the title of our documentary series, 1855. My favorite story, thank you for asking, Logan, was the focusing on Northfield was the Joseph Lee Haywood episode. I really enjoyed that. I think Mrs. Temple sometimes shows her kids clips of those, though she skips over some of the more gross parts. That episode is kind of gross, some of the descriptions that we have. He was a soldier. He got sick. Got descriptions of those. Not going to go into any more detail because then Mrs. Temple would have to block parts of this video. But we're not here to talk about Joseph Lee Haywood or getting sick or being wounded in war. I think today we'll be going before John North. John North came to this area and he decided he wanted to start a town. Now, Logan, if you were going to start a town, what would you want there to be? Now, assume this is all wilderness.
Okay. So
what sort of land would you want to start a community in?
Well, one of the main things you want is water. Water's big in a town.
It is.
You need to drink it. You need water for, especially if I know you mentioned we're talking about forming a town in the 1850s. And especially, water is good for power. There's no electricity yet, as I'm looking around trying to make my town, there's no, so water is a good power source.
Now, Logan, I'm with you. Water was a very important power source. These are smart kids. I think they can understand. There was electricity. It was just not accessible. electricity was not an invention. It was just not fully harnessed at this time.
That is a great point. That
Thank
is,
you.
thank you. Yeah, lightning still existed. Yes.
Yes. Um,
Uh-huh. Good catch.
Glad I derailed that excellent segue there.
Uh-huh.
Well, Logan, do you know what would be a great place then where there is water and there is water to make power? I'm talking about the Cannon River Valley.
Oh, yeah, yeah. The
Yeah,
Cannon River with the Cannon River in it.
that's right. And the Cannon River is, of course, the river that runs through Northfield. Do you know why they call it the Cannon River?
Well, there's a couple stories, but the main one is it's a story about people messing up and making mistakes, which actually a lot of history is. But this one in particular is there was a lot of canoeing going down this particular river, and so the French explorers who came down through this zone in the early 1800s would call the river the Canoe River, or the French word for canoe was canon, which is spelled Canon. I'm a native French speaker.
Yeah, clearly.
Canon. And so, then you have some people who don't speak French showing up in the zone, and they look at this river and say, okay, so what are the French people calling it? They're calling it the Canon River, and it's spelled Canon. And they don't know French as
Yeah,
well as
they're like me. They would see Canon and think it's pronounced canon.
exactly. Yeah, like you, not like me, the
Yeah.
expert French speaker.
Mhm.
And so they were like, hey, this is the Cannon River. I guess we're going to call it the Cannon River now. No cannons around. I haven't seen any cannons here. No cannons in the river, but it's the Cannon River now. And it's been the Cannon River ever since.
Now, Logan, before we talk about how a river gets to be a river, um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm confused. I thought
Okay.
this was wilderness. How are there canoes if it's a bunch of unsettled land?
Well, that's a great point, actually, because you'll hear a lot of people talk about Minnesota and kind of the West in general. And Minnesota in the early 1800s is part of the West at that time still. Uh, you'll hear them talk about it as just a pristine wilderness before like the French explorers came. What was actually going on is there were a lot of people living here. Uh, there were a lot of people who were part of the Dakota tribe who were living in this area. The Wapakuta tribe specifically lived very close to Northfield, and they were living here. They would move around. They'd live here. They hunt around. They'd gather in these areas. They'd dance. The kids would play around here. They lived here. They lived in this area. So, and then they would travel up and down the Cannon River in their canoes. And that's a huge part of this area's history is these people who were living here even before the French explorers showed up.
That's right. That's very good to know. And I think we'll be talking a little bit more about the Dakota and the Wapakuta and their way of life a little later. But
Yeah.
first, let's talk about that river. Where does a river come from? How does a river happen? Because John North didn't go out and dig himself a trench and fill it with a bunch of water. What was that?
That's a good point, I said.
Thank you.
You did.
I am a Minnesota master naturalist and a history communicator, so really a self-taught history communicator. This will be fun for the kids.
Yeah, all of those words are great
Yeah.
ones.
How do you think a river comes to be formed, Logan?
Well, it's pretty simple. It's what happens when a very tall man with a big beard and flannel jacket,
Ah,
Paul Bunyan. It's all he liked to walk through here, and I guess I don't know. I guess how a river is formed is he's like maybe
he's dragging. No.
skiing. I think he skis and the
I think you're
river
completely
stuff.
wrong. What Logan is talking about is the myth of Paul Bunyan. Now,
Yeah,
if any
no,
of you ever been to
the
what?
science,
What?
the science. Paul Bunyan. It's a
The
you,
science of Paul Bunyan.
okay. Why don't you tell me how rivers are formed?
Well, the story of Paul Bunyan is that he was an enormous lumberjack. He was a giant, essentially, and he would go around with his friend Babe the Big Blue Ox.
Mhm.
And some of you, if you've been to Bemidji or Duluth or other parts of the greater Midwest, you have likely been able to get a picture with Paul Bunyan. Like Logan said, he's got a beard, he's got a red flannel, and he's usually got an axe. Now, the myth goes that he would walk around America, and wherever he dragged his axe was where rivers were formed.
It wasn't skiing. It wasn't skiing, you're saying?
No, I don't think lumberjacks were known for their skiing, other than in Little Red Riding Hood.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, how are rivers actually formed then?
Well, it's actually closer to the Paul Bunyan story than you'd think. And now this makes it sound like us talking about Paul Bunyan was planned. But instead of it being a giant axe, it was a giant glacier. Glacier.
Paul Bunyan was carrying a giant glacier?
Excellent point. So a long, long time ago, the land we know as America, North America, was covered in ice. And that was what we would know as the Ice Age. Now, Logan, stop me if anything here is inaccurate. It's been a little while since I've been dusty, so feel free to interject here.
I'd love to.
And as the world got hotter over thousands of years, the glaciers, these giant mountains of ice, essentially, would start to melt. It would start to move. If you ever put an ice cube, if you ever dropped an ice cube onto the table or onto the floor, eventually there starts to be a little puddle, and it doesn't hold still as it turns into a puddle. It starts to slide. Now, you can imagine.
I would recommend that if you don't believe Sam, kids, go out, get some ice cubes, and Sam is encouraging that you drop ice cubes all over the kitchen table right now.
Now, this is a science experiment. Please do it safely. Make sure it's not a tripping hazard, and clean up after. Be sure to science responsibly.
Okay, but these glaciers are moving.
These glaciers are moving as they're melting. And remember, these are giant. So as they're scraping along, they are actually carving out the dirt from under them. And to the glaciers, it's nothing. But to us, this is what makes hills and valleys. This is what makes the enormous rivers that have these large bodies of water going through. And as the ice melts, the water from the glaciers actually fills those rivers. And that's how we have smaller rivers going off of things like the Mississippi or the Minnesota River. That's how we have the Cannon River and the Straight River.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And actually, when there would be chunks of dirt or sediment stuck in the glacier, as it melted, it would actually go off, and that could be a hill or that could be a mountain.
Oh my gosh, crazy.
Yeah. Sometimes actually when you go to your favorite nature spots, sometimes there's just a large rock in the middle of nowhere.
That's right. Large rock.
Yeah, great. Large rocks. Now, if they're not put there by a landscaper, they're in either a prairie or an area in the woods, and it seems out of place, that's because it is. There's a good chance that giant rock in the middle of nowhere that doesn't fit with its environment, that was actually dropped by a glacier thousands of years ago.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah. So when you look around, when you see where there are hills and there's a valley, that's the work of a glacier going and carving through. I don't need an analogy. I think that's self-explanatory.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay. So
it's a lot of personal growth. Yeah.
Paul Bunyan's not so crazy after all.
In the sense that his axe potentially carved rivers and that rivers were carved by glaciers? I agree.
Okay, great. Well, what else?
Well,
now that we have that part of the story cleared up.
Yeah. So now that we have a bunch of dirt everywhere, and
we do.
So glaciers have left behind dirt carved into valleys and rivers, and the water left behind from the glacier leaves a bunch of water for the rivers. Does it stay dirt?
Does it stay dirt? Well, I'm looking around, and there's some other stuff other than dirt outside.
That's right. So eventually, plants start to grow.
That's what those things are. Yeah.
That's right. Now, seeds could either be embedded in the rock, embedded in the glacier as it's moving along, or more often, as there is more land for that's no longer covered in a glacier, animals would come through, and
Oh, great.
they would bring with them the food that they have in their bellies, and they would drop it off um, through
Nice.
their
There are children present. Be careful.
scat. Um, and it would eventually grow into seeds. Now that's one simple way that the seed would spread, but eventually this would happen over, again, hundreds of years, and eventually you have grass, and
Oh gosh.
grass can grow tall and eventually be a prairie. Now, if you can think of Logan, give us some examples of prairies in the area that people would be in.
Oh man. Well,
Might not.
there's a prairie near Carlton. There's kind of a prairie zone there. There's a prairie zone in Riverbend Nature Center in Faribault.
That's right.
And actually, at one point, almost half of Northfield was a prairie, and
That's
the
right.
other half was the woods spread by all those seeds you mentioned earlier. So
Yeah.
there are prairies still around here, but it used to be almost entirely prairie around here, and then the rest of it would have been woodland.
Yeah, and why do we have areas that are woodlands and areas that are prairies? Prairies are mostly made up of tall grasses, and the tall grasses, their roots go for yards and yards under the ground. You think they're like a little blade of grass that you can just pluck out and that's it. But they're not like flowers where the roots only go maybe a foot. Theirs go for yards and yards under the ground. There are miles of roots that keep the prairies rooted in the ground. Now, sometimes, whether it's the Dakota people burning the prairies so that it can grow back healthy, or whether it was these large animals called bison that would come and they would step on the ground and actually stomp down the prairie grass, that would prevent the prairies from growing more dense. If you let a prairie grow without burning it or taking care of it or stomping on it, it will eventually, over years and years and years, grow into woodlands.
Oh my
So,
gosh.
so that's actually why, if you've ever, I know St. Olaf takes part in this, and so does Riverbend Nature Center in Faribault. They will actually have prairie burnings, and we would think that this is bad, but this actually keeps the prairie as a healthy living environment for the animals that live there. So prairies, if you let them grow, will eventually become woodlands.
Wow, there you go.
Do you have any questions about that, Logan?
No, I'm still struggling to figure out how Paul Bunyan fits into this, but because everything's kind of been my entire worldview has just been shattered. But I think I'm adjusting. I like what you're saying.
Good. Do you have any questions about that concept? I kind of jumped really quickly from prairies existing to prairies being burned by humans. When did humans come into the picture, Logan?
Oh, well, well, you've got the first human beings to come to North America showed up about 20,000 years ago, I think is the generally accepted number. Actually coming from Asia, coming over once upon a time, a very long time ago, there used to be a strip of land connecting Alaska to Russia, essentially, along that part of the Pacific Ocean. And human beings crossed this strip of land, entered North America, and eventually populated most of North America or much of North America and much of South America as well. And they'd move around along the coasts of North America into the wooded central regions, into places that would eventually become Minnesota. And by the 1600s, 1700s, the group of people living in Minnesota in our area in the Cannon River Valley is the Dakota people, who had been descended from people who were living around in this region of the country for thousands of years at that time. And so like we mentioned earlier, the specific group of the Dakota who lived nearby, specifically near Faribault, was called the Wapakuta people.
Yeah. What does Wapakuta mean?
It means shooters from the leaves, right?
Yeah, something like that. Leaf shooters.
Like that, because the translation isn't isn't perfect. We've both seen different translations of it.
Yeah.
Generally, it signifies kind of more of a woodland type living.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you said that they were Wapakuta, but you also said they were Dakota. What does that mean?
So it's just like how we're Minnesotans, but we're also Americans. It's not just like that, but it's multiple identities. The Dakota people were a large group of people connected via family relations and through language as well. There were many thousands of Dakota people living around this area, over west and south and east. Um, and most of them spoke the same language. They speak a little bit differently, just like, I'd go and talk to someone in Texas and I would talk a little bit differently than them, but we're still both speaking English. But I'm from Minnesota and that person's from Texas. And in the same way, some Dakota people were part of the Wapakuta, and some of them were part of, for example, the Mdewakanton. So that's generally what that's like.
Yeah, so they would live all around Minnesota and Iowa and part of North and South Dakota, which is named after the Dakota people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So now we kind of have an understanding about why John North and the other settlers were drawn to this place. It had water from the river, which could be used for farming and drinking and producing power. And it would also have access to beautiful prairies and woodlands. Specifically, Northfield was attached to the big woods. Now today, that little section is basically cut down to a small area in Nerstrand called the Big Woods, which is about 15 minutes from Northfield. But that would have been a big draw too, because that's one of the major resources. If you have lumber, then you can build a house. And I think next time in this class, we'll talk about people building some houses as we know them today. Logan, do you have any other questions before we say goodbye for today?
No, I don't think so. I just where can I get my hands on some ice cubes
for that fun experiment that everyone will do safely. You are limited to using 2 ice cubes for your experiment.
Okay, good.
Anything more than that might be a little excessive. Logan, before we sign off, I have something that I need to tell you, and this might be kind of hard for you to hear, but I also want to tell you in front of the kids so they can be here to support you emotionally. We talked a lot today about glaciers and rivers forming. And you initially had this idea about Paul Bunyan.
Yeah, Paul Bunyan, the guy who exists. Yeah.
Logan, I'm really sorry to have to be the one to tell you this, but
don't say it. No, you're not gonna. No.
Paul Bunyan, Babe the Big Blue Ox, all of it isn't real. It's a tall tale. It's like a fairy tale.
You mean he died a while ago, and so he's not alive anymore. That's what you mean, right? Okay, that's Abraham Lincoln's dead. So on and so forth.
Well, no. Abraham Lincoln was a real person that existed. Paul Bunyan.
I get it. I get what you're saying. Yeah, I see. Yeah.
Exists in our hearts, in the spirits of Minnesotans and people all along the northern United States, but just he did not exist in real life.
Paul
Bunyan.
Paul Giamatti did not exist. How did he get in all those movies?
Paul Bunyan from the. Okay, Logan, you and I will say off. I'm gonna hit stop on the recording now. Kids, let us know if you have any questions. Otherwise, Mrs. Temple can translate with us. I need to comfort Logan now. Bye-bye. How do I stop?